Hello and welcome to Cyclocosm.com's How the Race Was Won for Stage 11 of the 2010 Tour de France. After a weekend of race-shaping GC action, a rest day, and yesterday's Bastille commemorative chillaxathon, consensus among the commentators was that the peloton would return to the familiar pattern of break, catch, sprint. Stage 11's break went literally as the commissar was waving his flag and was never challenged by a second attack. The move took the top three places over the day's single climb, the Cat 3 Col de Cabra, and KOM leader Jérôme Pinot snapped up the final point from the field, doubling his hair-thin lead in that competition. After the climb, the peloton eased off a bit, but despite an ostensibly relaxing day in the summer heat, the gap never really ballooned, staying below 2 minutes for most of the day. There was still ample opportunity for the usual sunny day time killers, weird French art, cathedrals, gliders, arguing over who can eat the most fried turkeys, but the number crunches kept coming up with the same conclusion. This breakaway would be caught well ahead of schedule. You'd think, after the catch at 22k to go, that HTC would wind up a long lead-out, but as the course snaked its way around a river valley into Bourges, headwinds became crosswinds, and Saxo Bank came forward to absolutely drill the pace, lining out the field and making a certain reigning Tour champ look pretty lonely up at the head of the bunch. Quickstep Sylvain Chavanel took a brief moment to prove that no pace is high enough to dissuade him from attacking suicidally, and after the Frenchman was pulled back, the lead-out began. In case you forgot to turn on your internet yesterday, what happened coming into the final meters of this stage was a matter of no small controversy. While a strong tailwind reduced the incentive for riders to sit up behind a single lead-out, a tough chicane leading into the final kilometer put the usual sprint suspects back at the front of the race, and the dearth of interlopers gave everyone, including the race jury, a clear view of the action. At around 500 meters to go, a number of riders tucked in behind the HTC train decided to make their moves to get a jump on Cav. Julian Dean began towing Tyler Farrar up the right side of the road, and just in case you forgot sprinting was rough, he takes a pretty hard check from B-Box's Sébastien Turgeot, who senses the same opening. At this point, it's clear that Dean is gaining ground, and HTC's Mick Rogers needs to pull off or risk boxing Cav in. The much-discussed headbutts begin as Dean starts to come by Renshaw. It initially looks bad, but as you can see from the overhead shot, Dean is trying to shoulder Renshaw over to the left, ostensibly with the intention of closing off the amount of space that HTC has to sprint in. And honestly, headbutting is pretty safe, a good way to defend space without coming off your line. Compare it to the swerving caused by Turgeot a few meters earlier. In case you missed my previous video, line deviation is the only action specifically forbidden by the rules. It's also worth noting that behind the two lead-out men, both Cav and Farrar are pretty unmoved by all this, waiting to see how the battle plays out before picking where to make their move. At one point, Farrar even seems ready to follow Lamprey. When Cavendish does make his winning launch a second later, there's no question he's the fastest. Farrar responds by moving to Renshaw's wheel to gain shelter while accelerating, and it's after the American does get up to speed that the Aussie makes his big mistake. Renshaw first checks over his left shoulder and then cuts towards the barriers, a classic example of shutting the gate on Farrar, who has to reach out with a little shove to keep the gap open. Better sprinters than I have argued that Renshaw has as much right as Farrar to get on Cav's wheel. That's certainly correct, and with a close points race, you want your lead-out man to suck up as many places as possible. But the fact that Renshaw looked and then cut over while Farrar was clearly coming past him is hard to overlook. In the end, the gate closing slows both riders enough that Alessandro Petacchi has time to come all the way across the road onto Cavendish's wheel, or the massive space behind it anyway, and take second, bumping Farrar back to third. In the post-race reactions, which versus Robbie Ventura did a great job of getting just seconds after the sprint, Dean's ice-cold demeanor compared with Farrar's worked-up state give a pretty good example of where Renshaw went wrong. Still, the appropriate penalty for this gate closing, at least historically speaking, is a relegation, not a DQ. But Renshaw had the misfortune of leading out the winning rider, and Tour officials, not illogically, wanted some way to dissuade other lead-out men from taking dangerous actions in support of their teammates. Still, the punishment doesn't fit the crime, especially in light of the fisticuffs between Beretta and Costa earlier in the race. Let the high-nosed indignation of organizers that "this is a bike race, not a gladiator's arena," disabuse you of any notion that the race jury provides a fair trial. I'm Cosmo Catalano, and that's how the race was won.